The smell of roasted turkey and spiced pumpkin pie filled the dining room, but no one seemed to notice the food. The table was crowded with silverware clinking, laughter echoing, and cousins whispering in between bites. It was one of those rare Thanksgivings where nearly the whole family had gathered under Grandma's roof. She sat at the head of the table, her sharp eyes scanning across her children and grandchildren with the same authority she had always commanded. Then, in the middle of the small talk and chatter, her voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Daniel," she said, her tone calm but firm, "what happened to the hotel I gave you?" The entire room froze. Every fork and knife paused midair. The laughter died instantly. Even the crackling of the fireplace seemed to grow louder as if the flames themselves wanted to hear the answer. At the far end of the table, my father, Daniel, dropped his fork. It hit the porcelain plate with a loud clatter that echoed in the silence. His face drained of color, and for the first time that evening, he looked cornered. My eyes widened. The hotel? The hotel Grandma was talking about wasn't just any building. It was the family's pride, a grand old landmark in the city that had been passed down for generations. Elegant chandeliers, polished marble floors, and the golden name etched above its doors. Everyone knew it as the Redwood. For as long as I could remember, Grandma had said it was our family's heartbeat. And she had given it to Dad years ago when she decided it was time for him to carry on the legacy. But now, as everyone stared at him, it was clear something was wrong. Dad cleared his throat and reached for his glass of water, his hand trembling just enough for me to notice. "Mom," he began, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "let's not talk about business tonight. It's Thanksgiving. We should just enjoy dinner." But Grandma didn't let it go. Her gaze was locked on him, sharp and unrelenting. "Don't dodge the question, Daniel," she said, her voice steady. "That hotel has been in our family for nearly 80 years. I trusted you with it. Now tell me, what happened to it?" Murmurs started spreading across the table. My cousins glanced at one another. My aunt leaned forward, frowning. I could feel my stomach tighten. Dad wasn't answering. He wasn't even looking at Grandma. He just kept shifting in his chair, his eyes darting anywhere but at her. Finally, he muttered, "It's complicated." The words hung in the air like smoke. Complicated? What could possibly be complicated about owning a hotel that had already been paid off and thriving? I glanced at Grandma, expecting her to soften, but instead, her expression darkened. She leaned back in her chair, folded her hands, and said, "Well, then, I suggest you start explaining, because this family deserves to know." And in that moment, I knew our Thanksgiving dinner had just turned into something else entirely, an interrogation. And Dad was running out of excuses. As whispers began to ripple around the table, someone else spoke up, someone who already knew part of the truth. And that truth was far uglier than anyone expected. The silence in the dining room was unbearable. Knives and forks lay abandoned, untouched plates of turkey growing cold. Everyone's eyes were locked on Dad, but he refused to look up. He stared at the tablecloth like it could somehow swallow him whole. Then, out of nowhere, Uncle Robert cleared his throat. His voice was low, but the weight of his words carried across the table. "Mom," he said carefully, "I think Daniel should tell you about the mortgage." My heart skipped a beat. Mortgage? On the Redwood? Dad's head snapped up, his eyes blazing at his brother. "Robert, don't," he hissed, his tone sharp enough to make even my cousins shrink back in their seats. But it was too late. The room had already shifted. Everyone leaned forward, curiosity piqued. Grandma's brow furrowed, her lips tightening. "Mortgage," she repeated slowly, the word tasting bitter on her tongue. Uncle Robert sighed, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Daniel took out a mortgage against the hotel a few years ago. A big one. He said it was for renovations, but I'm not sure that's where all the money went." Gasps echoed around the table. My aunt clutched her pearls. My cousins exchanged wide-eyed stares. I looked at Dad, my chest tightening. Renovations? That didn't sound right. I had visited the hotel just last year, and nothing seemed different. No shiny new upgrades, no flashy improvements. Just the same Redwood I had always known. Dad's face flushed red. I was going to tell you all, he muttered, his voice strained. But I had it under control. The plan was solid. Solid. Grandma's voice cracked like thunder. Her hand trembled against the table, but her eyes remained fierce. Daniel, I gave you that hotel free and clear. It was meant to support you, not drown you in debt. What have you done? Dad pushed back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. I didn't lose it, he snapped. Not yet. The words were supposed to reassure us, but instead, they sent a chill down my spine. Not yet. So it's in danger, isn't it? I whispered before I could stop myself. The room went still again, every pair of eyes turning toward me. My dad's gaze softened for just a second when he looked at me, but then he shook his head. You don't understand, he said, his voice cracking under the pressure. It's complicated. Uncle Robert scoffed. Complicated? Daniel, you gambled with our family's legacy. You've been hiding this for years, and now Mom's asking you directly. Are you going to tell her the truth, or do I have to? Dad's fists clenched on the table. His jaw tightened, the veins in his neck straining. Finally, he slammed his palm against the wood, making the dishes rattle. Fine, he shouted. Yes, I took out the mortgage. Yes, I needed the money. But it wasn't for renovations, and it sure as hell wasn't for me to squander. The room erupted in questions, voices overlapping. My cousins gasped. My aunt demanded answers. Grandma's eyes widened in shock. What do you mean, Daniel? She asked, her voice shaking but firm. If it wasn't for you, then who is it for? Dad closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping as though the fight had drained out of him. He whispered something barely audible, but in the silence, we all heard it. It was for someone else. The room went dead quiet again. My pulse pounded in my ears. Someone else? Who? And just like that, the Thanksgiving feast turned into a battlefield of secrets. The family demanded to know who Dad had given the money to. But when the name finally left his lips, it shattered everything we thought we knew about him and about us. The tension around the table was unbearable. Turkey grew cold, pumpkin pie sat untouched, and even the candles seemed to flicker nervously as everyone leaned forward, waiting for Dad to speak. His chest rose and fell heavily, his hands trembling against the table. Finally, with a hoarse voice, he admitted, I took the money for Mark. A stunned silence blanketed the room. Grandma blinked. Mark? She asked, confused. Mark, your business partner? Dad shook his head slowly. No. Mark? Mom, he's your grandson. My son. From before I met Linda. The air sucked out of the room. My fork clattered onto my plate. My cousins froze mid-breath. Grandma's face went pale, as though she'd seen a ghost. You're what? She whispered. Dad swallowed hard, his eyes glossy with shame. I never told anyone. Years ago, when I was young and reckless, I had a relationship before I met Linda. She got pregnant. She didn't tell me until much later. By then, Mark was already a teenager. The table erupted. You've had a son this whole time and never said a word? Uncle Robert's voice thundered. You let us think you were some responsible family man, and all the while... Dad slammed his fist down again, his voice shaking. I didn't know how to tell anyone. I was ashamed, Robert. Ashamed of abandoning him without even knowing he existed. My stomach twisted. A brother? A half-brother I had never known? The thought felt impossible. I looked at Mom. Her face was white, her lips trembling, tears brimming in her eyes. How long have you been supporting him? She whispered, almost too softly to hear. Dad's eyes darted to her. Since he was 16. He needed help, Linda. He didn't have anyone. His mother passed away a few years ago, and he came to me. I couldn't just turn him away. And so you gave him the redwood? Grandma's voice cracked like lightning. Dad winced. Not directly. But he had debts, terrible ones. I thought if I took out the mortgage, I could buy him time to get back on his feet. I could feel my blood boiling. So you risked losing our family's hotel for a stranger we didn't even know existed? Not a stranger. Dad shouted back, his eyes locking with mine, filled with both fury and desperation. "He's your brother. My son. Flesh and blood." The words sliced through me like knives. My brother?
No.
He wasn't my brother. He was the reason Dad had gambled with our family's future. Grandma pressed a hand to her chest, tears welling in her eyes. "Daniel, you should have told me. You should have told all of us. But instead, you hid him and endangered everything I worked for." Dad shook his head, his voice breaking. "I thought I could handle it. I thought I could save him without anyone ever knowing. But it spiraled out of control. His debts grew worse. And now his words trailed off, his jaw trembling. Now I'm afraid it's too late." The table fell silent again, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Uncle Robert leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Where is he now, Daniel? Where's this mark you threw everything away for?" Dad hesitated, his lips parting but no words coming out. Finally, he looked down at his plate, his voice a whisper. "He's here." The dining room door creaked open, and in stepped a tall young man with piercing eyes and a shadow that seemed to stretch across the room. And just like that, Thanksgiving turned into a reckoning. Mark had arrived, and he wasn't the lost, helpless son Dad had painted him to be. The truth he carried would unravel every bond at the table, and Grandma's hotel was only the beginning. The door creaked wider, and there he was.
Mark.
He looked nothing like Dad, and yet, something about the way he held himself, that familiar stubborn set of his jaw, made it undeniable. He stepped into the dining room, every eye on him, his boots echoing on the hardwood floor like a countdown. "Hello," he said simply, scanning the table with a faint smirk. "So, this is the famous family." Mom stiffened. Grandma's fork trembled in her hand. My heart hammered in my chest. Dad half stood, torn between shame and pride. Mark raised a hand, cutting him off. "Save it, Dad. You've already done enough." The way he said Dad, sharp, almost mocking, sent a chill down my spine. He turned toward Grandma, his gaze unflinching. "You must be Eleanor, the woman who built the redwood." Grandma's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's correct. And you are the one Daniel mortgaged it away for." Mark tilted his head. "Mortgaged? Is that the story he told you?" He let out a low, humorless laugh.
Typical.
Always twisting things to make himself look noble. Dad's face flushed red. "Mark, don't." "Oh, I think I will," Mark said, his voice slicing through the air. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "See, the truth is the hotel isn't just mortgaged. It's practically mine." The room erupted. "What do you mean yours?" I demanded, my fists clenching under the table. Mark's eyes flicked to me, cool and sharp. "Because your father didn't just mortgage it for my debts. He signed over controlling interest."
To me.
Grandma's face drained of all color. "Daniel, tell me that isn't true." Dad's lips moved, but no words came out. Finally, he dropped his head into his hands. "I thought it was temporary. I thought I could get it back once things stabilize." "Temporary?" Grandma's voice thundered, trembling with rage. "You handed away my life's work to a boy you barely know." Mark chuckled. "Barely know?"
Oh no, Grandma.
"He knows me well enough. Well enough to realize I don't play by family rules. Business is business." The smugness in his voice made bile rise in my throat. "You conned him," I spat. "You manipulated him into this." Mark smirked. "Manipulated?"
Please.
I didn't twist his arm. He offered it, desperate to prove he was finally being a father to me. He thought throwing me the hotel would buy back lost years. He leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. "But the thing about debts is they don't just vanish."
And now?
"The redwood isn't just collateral. It's leverage." Mom gasped. "Leverage for what?" Mark's grin widened. "For control. Of this family. Of everything." The silence that followed was suffocating. Grandma gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "Young man, let me make this clear. I built the redwood with my own 2 hands. I endured poverty, war, and tragedy to see it stand. If you think you can waltz in here and claim it as yours, you've underestimated me. Mark's eyes glimmered with something dark. We'll see about that. Dad looked between us all, broken and desperate. Please, just stop. We can work this out. No, Daniel. Grandma snapped, her voice sharp as glass. You may have brought this wolf to our door, but don't think for a second I'll let him devour us. For the first time, I saw fear flicker in Mark's eyes. Not much, but enough to tell me Grandma's words had struck a nerve. But then his smile returned, slow and dangerous. Then I guess Thanksgiving just got interesting. Mark had revealed his hand, but the night was far from over. As secrets piled higher than the untouched plates of food, one hidden document threatened to change everything, and this time, not even Mark could control the fallout. NG. Thanksgiving dinner had become a battlefield. The turkey sat untouched, steam fading into the tense silence that followed Mark's smug declaration. My father avoided everyone's gaze, guilt dripping from his every movement, while Grandma sat tall, her fury radiating across the table. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, the doorbell rang. No one moved at first. It rang again, louder this time, like it demanded attention. Mom finally stood and hurried to the door, her face pale. A man in a charcoal gray suit stood on the porch, holding a leather briefcase and a thick envelope. His sharp glasses glinted in the porch light. Good evening, he said politely. I apologize for the intrusion, but I was instructed to deliver this personally. Is Daniel Whitmore here? Dad looked like he'd seen a ghost. Mr. Collins, he whispered. The lawyer nodded.
Yes.
Your father's attorney. I was told to bring these documents tonight. He stepped inside, placing the envelope on the table as if it were a live grenade. Grandma's hand shot out before Dad could react. What documents? She demanded. Collins adjusted his glasses, clearing his throat. These are from Edward Whitmore's estate, your late husband.
He tapped the envelope.
It appears there was a clause in his will that hasn't been disclosed until now. A clause directly concerning the Redwood Hotel. The room froze. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. Dad reached for the envelope, but Grandma's glare stopped him cold. She tore it open herself, pulling out several crisp papers bound with a seal. Her eyes scanned the first page, and slowly, her face transformed from suspicion to shock to a thin, triumphant smile. Well, she said finally, her voice icy but steady. It seems Edward was wiser than I thought. What does it say? I asked, my voice trembling. Grandma looked directly at Mark. It says that the Redwood Hotel cannot be sold, transferred, or used as collateral without unanimous approval of Edward's direct heirs, meaning myself, Daniel, and you. Her eyes flicked to me. I blinked. Me? Collins nodded.
Yes.
Edward must have added this amendment shortly before his passing. Perhaps he foresaw complications. Dad buried his face in his hands. Oh, God. Mark's smirk faltered. That can't be right. I already have controlling interests. No. Grandma cut him off. You have nothing unless we agree. And I, for one, will never sign over a brick of that hotel to you. Mark's jaw tightened, anger flashing in his eyes. So, what? You're going to let it rot just to spite me? You think you can keep me out? Grandma leaned forward, her voice like steel. I don't think. I know. The lawyer cleared his throat again. There's more. He shuffled through the papers and pulled out a single sheet. Mr. Whitmore also left instructions. If any attempt was made to secretly transfer or manipulate ownership, the property rights would default to his granddaughter. The room gasped. My ears rang as his words sank in. His granddaughter? I repeated, pointing to myself in disbelief. Collins nodded firmly.
Yes.
To you. The room exploded into chaos. Dad pushed back from the table, his face pale as ash. No, this can't. He never told me. Mark slammed his fist against the table, rattling the silverware. That's impossible. I've already sunk money into it. I've already made deals. Grandma rose slowly to her feet, pride blazing in her eyes. Then consider those deals worthless. Because from this moment forward, the redwood belongs to her.
She pointed directly at me.
My chest tightened, my throat dry, but somewhere beneath the fear was something else.
Power.
Mark's voice dropped low, venom dripping from every word. You think this is over? This is just the beginning. And with that, he stormed out, the front door slamming behind him. The room was silent again, except for the steady ticking of the grandfather clock. Everyone turned toward me. The girl who, 5 minutes ago, had been nothing more than a spectator, now suddenly held the keys to everything. And for the first time that night, it wasn't my father or Mark or even Grandma who held the power. It was me. Mark might have stormed out, but he wasn't gone. With money, connections, and a dangerous hunger for control, he wasn't about to let me keep the redwood without a fight. And his next move would strike where we least expected. The Redwood Hotel should have felt like a victory, but instead, it weighed on me like a storm cloud waiting to burst. The lawyer's envelope had changed everything, but deep down, I knew Mark wouldn't just walk away. For the first few days, the house was unnervingly quiet. Dad avoided me, drifting from room to room like a ghost, while Grandma seemed to be plotting something with Collins, whispering in hushed tones over coffee. I, meanwhile, kept rereading the papers, my name written in bold letters as the rightful heir. It didn't feel real, but reality came crashing in the following week. I was walking home from campus when I noticed a sleek black car parked across the street. Its tinted windows reflected the gray sky, and though no one stepped out, I felt the weight of unseen eyes tracking my every move. The car was still there the next day. Grandma was the first to notice my pale face. "He's watching you," she said flatly when I told her. "Mark doesn't lose gracefully." She was right. That night, our phones began to buzz with anonymous calls. At first, silence. Then, distorted voices muttering threats. "The hotel will be mine. Walk away before you get hurt." Dad finally snapped, pacing the living room in a panic. "You don't understand what Mark is capable of. He has investors, dangerous people. If they think they're losing money, they'll come after us all." I clenched my fists. "Then let them come. I won't give him the redwood." But Mark didn't just come after us with words. He came after us with fire. 3 nights later, I woke to the acrid scent of smoke. My window glowed orange, and when I rushed outside, I saw it. The old barn near the edge of Grandma's property engulfed in flames. Neighbors shouted, hoses hissed, and by the time the fire trucks arrived, the barn was nothing more than charred rubble. Grandma stood beside me, her jaw set. "A warning," she said bitterly. "He's telling us he can burn down more than barns." The next morning, Collins confirmed our fears. "Marcus filed an injunction," he explained, sliding a stack of papers across the table. "He's challenging Edward's clause in court, claiming fraud. If he succeeds, your inheritance could be tied up for years." I felt the ground slipping beneath me. Between the threats, the fire, and now the legal war, it was clear Mark wouldn't stop until he had destroyed everything. But Grandma didn't waver. "Let him try," she said, her voice low but fierce. "We will not be bullied out of what Edward left us." For the first time, I saw her not as the warm, steady grandmother who baked pies and knitted scarves, but as a warrior, unyielding, prepared to fight tooth and nail. Still, a knot tightened in my chest. Because while Grandma prepared for court, I had the gnawing sense that Mark's retaliation wasn't finished. He wasn't just going to fight us in court or with fire. He was going to strike at the one thing that could break me completely. And I had no idea when or how it would happen. The courtroom battle was coming, but Mark's next move wasn't legal, it was personal. And when he aimed his attack at the person I loved most, the fight for the redwood turned into a fight for survival. The courtroom buzzed with a quiet tension, every whisper echoing off the polished wood walls. This wasn't just about money or property anymore, it was about legacy, betrayal, and survival. The Redwood Hotel's fate hung in the balance, but so did my family's safety. Mark sat across the aisle, perfectly tailored suit, lips curled into that smug grin he wore like armor. His mother clutched his arm, as if he were the victim in all this. But I knew better. We all did. The judge entered, and the room stilled. Collins leaned toward me, whispering, "Remember, Edward's clause is airtight. We just need to prove Mark's interference." But Mark wasn't relying on law. He was relying on intimidation. Just 2 nights earlier, my best friend Jenna had been followed home from work. She came to me, shaken, saying a man in a black car had warned her to tell Daniel to back off, or else. My blood boiled, but I didn't tell Grandma. She had enough to carry. The trial began. Mark's lawyer painted him as the responsible heir, claiming Edward had been coerced in his old age. He gestured toward me with disdain, saying, "Daniel was never prepared to handle such a valuable property." It's obvious Edward's judgment was clouded. My fists clenched under the table. Every word was a dagger. Then Collins stood, calm but firm, and began dismantling their lies piece by piece. He presented financial records of Mark's reckless debts, proof of shady deals with dangerous investors, and, most damning, security footage. The courtroom gasped as the screen flickered to life, showing a man in a black hoodie near Grandma's barn the night it burned down. He wasn't careful enough. For just a moment, the hood slipped, revealing Mark's face illuminated by firelight. "Your Honor," Collins said sharply, "this isn't about a rightful heir. This is about greed, threats, and arson." Mark shot to his feet, shouting, "That's not me. That's fake. They're framing me." His voice cracked with desperation, and for the first time, his polished mask broke. The judge banged his gavel. "Sit down, Mr. Harrison." When the verdict was read, it felt like the air was sucked out of the room. The Redwood Hotel was legally and irrevocably mine. Mark's face went red, veins bulging. He screamed, "This isn't over, Daniel. You'll regret this." Bailiffs had to drag him out as his mother wailed behind him. Grandma reached for my hand, her grip trembling but strong. "You did it," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You honored Edward. You honored us all." But as we walked out of that courtroom, victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like survival. I had the hotel, yes, but I had also uncovered the depths of Mark's darkness. And though he was disgraced, part of me knew his threats weren't empty. Still, when I stood in front of the Redwoods' grand entrance later that night, keys in my hand, I felt a surge of something stronger than fear. Resolve. "This place is mine now," I whispered into the night. "And no one, not even you, Mark, will ever take it from me."